Welcome to the Spy Collection. I'm Anastasios, and this time I have some memorabilia items from CIA's Civil Air Transport, specifically from a former CIA officer who worked for Civil Air Transport and passed away a few years ago. Civil Air Transport, or CAT, was a nationalist Chinese airline that existed from 1946, but due to some financial challenges, it was covertly acquired by the CIA in 1950 through a series of front companies. Then it was used extensively for Southeast Asia clandestine operations while, at the same time, continuing to be operating as a normal airline. In 1959, the CIA changed its name to Air America, and eventually, in 1968, Civil Air Transport ceased all operations. The Air America continued for a few more years, until 1976. Now to our main artifact in this video. This lighter. This lighter was the model KBL 500 manufactured by the Japanese Prince Manufacturing Company. This was a company that started in the early 50s at the end of the occupation of Japan by United States and mainly manufacturing custom lighters for American troops and the local companies. This lighter belonged to a former CIA officer who worked in CAT and passed away a few years ago, so it has a lot of value from that perspective. However, it also has some historic value because it denotes the introduction of the Convair 880 airplane to CAT's fleet. Convair was a division of General Dynamics and from 1959 until 1962 manufactured the narrow-body airliner 880 to offer a smaller and faster alternative to the Boeing 707 and the Douglas DC-8. CAT was one of the handful of airlines that purchased this airplane in 1961. This was a huge deal back then, since this single Convair 880M that CAT got was the first pure jet airplane for scheduled passenger flights on regional routes in the Far East. This is why it got the nickname the Mandarin Jet. As a celebration of this new addition to CAT's fleet, they designed those custom lighters since smoking was allowed everywhere back then, including in flights. So, on one side of the lighter, we have the destinations CAT had in 1961, and on the other side, the newly introduced Convair 880M. The M version had slightly more powerful engines. This airplane got the registration number Bravo 1008, and you can find a couple of photos of it on the internet, such as this one from Tokyo, taken in June 30th, 1961, or this one from Taipei in Taiwan, taken in 1963. CAT also produced postcards for travelers to advertise this important addition to the fleet, like this one, or this one. That plane was also featured in several Civil Air Transport videos, and if that wasn't already enough, in 1963 it was the cover of the airline's magazine known as the CAT Bulletin. Here is the Bravo 1008 at the new, back then, Taipei Airport Terminal. Those magazines had a column known as Distinguished Groups that Prefer CAT, and in almost all issues of the magazine you can see the Bravo 1008 being featured in that column. For example, here is a 1966 edition of the magazine, which was also the 20th anniversary of CAT. Here it features the entire fleet, and the brand new, even 1996, Convair 880M. This also gives us a little bit of the history of this airplane in those paragraphs over here. It says, an important step taken in this direction was to update its aircraft fleet with the Mandarin jet. Continues here. A Convair 880M with specially designed Chinese palatial interior decor. Thus, when CAT implemented the Mandarin jet services, it was the first airline to operate pure jet scheduled passenger service on regional routes in the Far East. And now if we move to the distinguished groups who prefer CAT column, we will see this airplane being featured in many of the photos. You can see it from Osaka to Taipei, from Tokyo to Taipei, and in several other flights. Even internally within the CIA, we can read that people were considering it a big deal. For example, in this declassified Inspector General survey on civil air transport towards the director of the CIA from January 10, 1962, we can find the following in page 10. In the past 2 years, 10 new types of aircraft have been added to the CAT fleet, thus enhancing its capability. The most modern is the 4-engine jet Convair 880. And of course, this is not the only case. This is just an example of these documents. Now, in case you wonder how much money CAT employees were making, here is another declassified document from the CIA's archive that provides this information specifically for the Convair 880. Of course, I will leave links in the description for all of the documents I'm presenting here. Okay, now remember that I told you that in 1959 the CIA reorganized civil air transport as Air America. What I didn't tell you was that the Air America then created a subsidiary with its headquarters in Taiwan called Air Asia. Air Asia provided technical, management and equipment services for civil air transport, and knowing all of that now, here is another declassified document from CIA's archive from November 19th, 1962, titled Minutes of Meeting of Board of Directors of Air Asia Company Limited. For this document, I'd like to draw your attention in this specific part over here. Vice Chairman Dool then reported that due to the high cost of replacement aircraft, the sale of the company's Convair 880-224 Bravo 1008 to Venezuelan International de Aviation, as discussed in the last board meeting, would not be a logical move at this time. So it looks like there was a consideration to sell this almost brand new airplane just 1 year after its introduction to the CAT's fleet. The next interesting declassified document that sheds some light in the history of this CIA-covered airplane is from 1964. This is again from the meeting notes of Air Asia, and where I would like to draw your attention is in this paragraph over here. The vice chairman also reported that a tentative quotation had been received for a war risk insurance covering the company's Convair 880 aircraft at a value of $4 million for a premium of $10,000. This means that in 1964, this Convair 880 airplane was likely used for clandestine operations by the CIA and as an airline without any considerations of selling it. But how exactly was it used for clandestine operations by the CIA? The first was, of course, surveillance, since many high-profile people like politicians, military officials, militia members, etc. were traveling using CAT. This allowed the CIA to track them, listen to their conversations while flying, and enable other operations in the human intelligence space. But it looks like there were more use cases. In this declassified document from 1961, we find a request from the CIA to modify a C-130B for use in clandestine operations, and with explicit mention to the clandestine radio set of the CIA. Under the redacted text, we read, "is specified so as to be compatible with ground support, test equipment, and spare parts that CAT will have available to maintain a similar set in their Convair 880. This document literally states that this clandestine radio kit was installed and used also in the Bravo 1008, and the fact that they redacted this paragraph indicates that there might have been more. But this is not the only proof of its secret life. Here is the cover of another declassified CIA document, this time from the Office of Logistics, titled Organization Logistics Planner's Guide. This was a 122 pages long document to allow logistics teams to know what the CIA had at its disposal back then for clandestine operations around the globe. On page 110, we find the only Convair 880M. The description says, "This aircraft is a 4-engine jet, low-wing monoplane capable of transporting personnel and material." So, apart from the clandestine radio, surveillance of people, and potentially other missions that we don't know of, it was used for clandestine transportation of people and material. The best, however, first-person account that I was able to find was this declassified interview from 1971 with Victor Marchetti, a former CIA officer who had worked with CAT. At one point in the interview, he said the following about CAT's mission. It starts here, where it says, "The CIA owns this? Is that what we're saying?" That's right. It started off as a very quiet. It grew out of a joint air operation that CIA and Chiang Kai-shek had, which was the civil air transport with the famous Mandarin jet. And originally, it was just a little rinky-dink transport-type air firm operating in Southeast Asia, going to places where other people didn't want to go, the bigger airlines. And this was perfect for CIA's purposes, because this way you could, from time to time, slip in an Agent Black or take in supplies and the like. Well, as the situation in Vietnam and Laos worsened and got into more of a shooting war, and the CIA found itself in the position of supporting in Laos and the government forces, the MIOs, to the tune of 30 or 40,000 men, a great number of weapons had to be delivered. A great deal of rice and other food supplies had to be provided. Well, then Air America just grew according and became virtually overt. I think anybody who has ever been to Southeast Asia knows that Air America is a CIA subsidiary, and yet they'll deny it. So, we saw how the Bravo 1008 was introduced, how it was used for clandestine operations and to boost CAT's popularity. But what was its end? Let me put this to the side and bring in another document. This time from 1966, 5 years after the introduction of the airplane. This is an inspection report from the Office of Secretary Legal Counsel of the CIA, and the important part is in this paragraph. Here we're reading, "CAT's Mandarin jet, the Convair 880, is serving Bangkok once weekly on a route of Taipei, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Taipei. For the sector between Bangkok and Hong Kong, there are few passengers, averaging only 20 to 30 per flight." If you recall in the logistics guide over here, we read that this plane could transport from 88 all the way up to 110 people, so that indicates that it was likely not going well at that point. Moving 1 year forward, in February 1967, here are the meeting notes of AirAsia, where we can read the following about Convair. It was reported that Cathay Pacific Airways purchased 2 Convair 880s from Venezuela carrier, and as a result is not considered as good prospect for early purchase of the company's Convair 880. It was pointed out that future market at the price which the company can obtain for its Convair 880 will undoubtedly diminish as more fan jet aircraft become available, and if the company is to dispose its Convair 880, it should do so at the earliest opportunity. And later, in a similar meeting notes from October 1967, we find the following. So AirAsia, the maintenance company, says that they had to do a relatively expensive repair to the Convair 880. And later on, from this CAT briefing paper from the CIA, we can find the following update. Present status: CAT has sold the Convair 880 and substituted a Boeing 727. The Boeing 707 kept the nickname the Mandarin Jet, but very soon, in February 1968, we can find the following report from the legal counsel of the CIA. As we can see, it is titled, "Why CAT Mandarin Jet Crashed?" The Boeing 727, which replaced the Convair in CAT's Mandarin services on January 10, had its wing changed pursuant to a fire accident at the AirAsia Tainan maintenance base a few months ago. And in case you wonder, what happened to this jet? What happened to the Bravo 1008 of the CAT fleet? It is unknown. In 1978, it was photographed being operated by Air Malta and probably eventually got decommissioned. To summarize, in 1961, the CIA brought in the first pure jet airline in the Far East, the Mandarin Jet. For the next 6 to 7 years, they used it both as a commercial airliner, but also for several clandestine operations ranging from covert transportations of people and material, close surveillance and travelers tracking, covert radio communications, and likely other missions. Eventually, in 1967, it became obsolete, and by January of 1968, it was replaced by the new Mandarin Jet, a Boeing 727. In 1978, the CIA jet was briefly seen operated by Air Malta, and then it got decommissioned. I hope that this little piece of history from a world unknown to most people gave you a good understanding of what we mean when we say that nothing is as it seems.